Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Startup Genome Global Webinar Series. Our topic for today is attracting VC investment to your city or region. And as always, we have our two video sessions, webinar sessions, to accommodate for a global audience. So 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. London time, and then later on is 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. San Francisco time. So today, we'll be getting into a brief introduction, then getting into the depth of the topic of attracting VC investment to your city or region, then hearing what's the impact, and then a group discussion of open questions and answers. So the purpose of the Startup Genome webinar series is to highlight specific tangible topics for startup ecosystem acceleration in order to produce sustainable ecosystem growth globally. In these sessions, we explain how we at Startup Genome, as well as our global partners, support the acceleration of global startup ecosystems. And as always, we want to hear your feedback of what you would like to hear more of. So there is my email there at adam@startupgenome.com. Please feel free to reach out as you have been doing so in the topics that you want to hear more of. So previous topics we have covered include funding policy to support startups and scale-ups during COVID-19, attracting the best talent and international resources, globally positioning your startup ecosystem, and many more. And the link is here, and everyone listening will be able to receive the slides and the recording of this video. So you'll have all the links there. So future topics include X-ray vision of your startup ecosystem, tracking and globally benchmarking your innovation economy, and more to come. And you can stay tuned on our webinar page. So for today, I would very, very pleased, and we're very fortunate to have with us Josefina Nungesser, the Director of Trend and Innovation Scouting at Germany Trade and Invest, as well as Sebastian Toupy, the Head of Startup Relations at the Next Web in Amsterdam, and our Head of Ecosystem Strategy here at Startup Genome, Stephan Kuester, for the topic of attracting VC investment to your city or region. So without further ado, I will leave it to Stephan Kuester, our Head of Ecosystem Strategy. Thanks, Stephan.
Thank you, Adam, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks so much for joining our webinar this morning. As you know, at Genome, we are working with a vast network of cities, more than 85 at the moment, in more than 40 countries, and do a lot of work in regards to assessing ecosystems, identifying their gaps, their opportunities, and helping with devising strategy. And strategy includes funding policy, all the way from pre-seed to seed to venture to Series A into late stage venture. And whenever I travel and discuss with our clients and colleagues in many of these ecosystems, even prior to the pandemic, one thing became obviously clear. There is a funding gap, a persistent funding gap when it comes to venture capital, when it comes to Series A, and also in later stage funding rounds in ecosystems that are younger, that are more nascent, that are off the beaten track of these top 10 ecosystems, the Silicon Valleys, the Londons, the New Yorks, the Singapores, and so forth. And that's clearly something that has been bugging us for quite a while, and trying to find mechanisms in order to bring to bear more venture capital and more funding, more international funding to these very promising ecosystems that they're highly, highly talented and highly promising startup founders and their teams. That's been prior to pandemic. That certainly has not changed, but rather has been exacerbated by what has been happening over the last 6 or 7 months. Our own research into COVID is telling a very clear story. We are seeing a massive drop in seed stage funding, so earlier stage funding. That's a big concern. That's geared to wiping up an entire generation of young startups. That's something that we've addressed with many governments in the world for policy to be put in place to preserve these young entrepreneurs and budding businesses. But we are also seeing later stage trends. And when I look at later stage VC, and that's when I say later stage, let me qualify that. That's actually Series A and onward. There are two things that I find to a degree concerning. First of all, VC seems to be more conservative in its investments. So we see much more we see sustained investment into larger companies, into companies in more traditional business models, if you will. So on the opposite, we see a drop in investments into deep tech, into really highly complex, long-term and high risk investments. That's obviously a concern in a time when deep tech and the rise of deep tech models is so important in order to innovate us out of the current health and economic crisis, but also going forward when we look at climate change and other things where we need other issues for mankind, where we need technology to come to bear. So it's my very pleasure to have with me today Josefina and Sebastian, who have devised and are working tirelessly with their ecosystems and with many clients in the case of Sebastian, with many clients around the world, in order to address these issues, in order to shine a spotlight on their region, their ecosystem, their clients' ecosystem, in order to attract not only talent, but also the investors that in the end fuel a successful ecosystem. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to you. I think, Sebastian, you're giving it a start, and really keen to hear both of your insights, Josefina and Sebastian. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephan, for the intro, and Adam as well, and for having us today. I'll start by giving a really quick introduction to TNW and what we do as a company before we dive into the Q&A. And as you've mentioned, we're a global digital brand that really is there to inform, inspire, and connect people who love technology through a series of different media, events, and types of services. And we started as an events company more than 15 years ago now, and sort of grew from there, always trying to position ourselves at the heart of the tech ecosystem. So yeah, I'm Sebastian. As you mentioned, I'm head of startup relations at the Next Web, and I basically spend the majority of my time helping startup to connect to different key ecosystem players, such as investors, mentors, accelerators, press, incubators, and also governments more lately, which I think has been transformative for a lot of those startups to understand how they can actually work with different types of stakeholders. And one of the things that we've been doing with our team at TNW lately is really figure out ways in which we can help to grow different tech ecosystems. Even prior to COVID, we've realized in the last 3 years that a lot of different ecosystem need growth, as you've mentioned, especially the secondary one that are not the major cities that everybody expect to be prominent in the tech space. And they're sort of like trying to figure out what are the tools that they need to use and what are the activities they need to engage in order to really grow that ecosystem. That it is not as easy as simply having a booth in a big trade show and positioning yourself there and sort of wait for people to come to you, but that there's a number of things that you need to do. And going to trade shows is a good first step, but I think is definitely not the only step. And we've realized that there was sort of a demand from those different ecosystems to be able to position themselves and to truly understand what is effective in positioning yourself. How should I position myself if I'm a second or third tier city in different parts of Europe? What are the key stakeholders that I need to sort of make partnerships with or start understanding how they function in order to be able to sort of build those collaborations in between players? Which is something that, of course, has become even more prominent now through COVID, that a lot of the offline activities that people were engaging in to build sort of that ecosystem presence is not really available anymore. And this is why I sort of mentioned how we sort of using our 4 different parts of the company as TNW, which is one sort of the media aspect. The second one is the spaces with the co-working space that we have in different parts of the city of Amsterdam. But then also the ecosystem services around innovation that we've been building lately. And then everything else, as mentioned, that's sort of related to the media part. So ecosystem development services, I've mentioned here a few. So we've got sort of the conferences that we've been running, which have been offline up until last year and moved to online this year, giving a bigger reach to a lot of the players that you were actually working with. Because even though you sort of don't have the same physical connections when you're at the event, it just allowed us to have a lot more people from different parts of the world that might not have been able to actually travel to Amsterdam to come in online and to be able to share. I think one amazing example is an event that we've organized with the Financial Times back in March, April, when the pandemic was really just hitting us. And a lot of the events that they were organizing up until there were relatively small, 100 to 150 people, highly targeted. And after sort of a plea from one of our co-founders, decided to open up the content that they're normally serving and make it more widely available. And within the space of a month and a half, we've managed to bring in 52,000 people from all parts of the world online to be able to sort of discuss those very important topics that are sort of touching both the government sector as well as the private sector, and bring those kind of stakeholders together. Then there's, of course, soft landing programs that we've been organizing, which were heavily focused on sort of offline activities. And now that we're reinventing to be able to give the opportunity to cities to sort of enter new markets, even though they don't physically move themselves over there. And we can come back to that later on with the activities we're doing with Josefina. There's innovation programs and scouting programs that are sort of meant for helping governments to be able to innovate by engaging in new services and new activities to solve some specific problems that they have in-house. This is something that I found very interesting and happy to discuss later as well, but the Dutch government is a great example of this, where the Ministry of Justice and Security has been lately engaging with startups from seed and Series A stage to be able to solve specific innovation challenges faced by the governments, where we as TNW would basically facilitate the connections between government stakeholders and civil servants to be able to be more innovative and actually start trying to solve those problems by working with innovative startups that have a very sort of different pace of action in terms of like how they approach problems and how they can implement them. And then on the branding side and the investment attraction, which is really the topic of today, we've seen that particularly since COVID, it's become incredibly difficult for a lot of early stage companies to be able to have access to those investors because they're busy, because they're focused on their current portfolio companies, because as you've mentioned, there's sort of a bit of a lack of interest in some of the really groundbreaking early stage technologies at the moment that might not be as attractive or more risky from a financial perspective. And then the question is, how can we actually facilitate that? How can we build a framework that help to connect those investors with those early stage companies and with governmental agencies that are also facilitating access for the portfolio companies they have in their regions to be able to still keep going and have those conversations at those meetings take place. We found it to be a really big challenge, but to be a very important one that we need to focus our attention to, and to really be creative in how we sort of make sure that we don't just create an event for the sake of building an event, but that it really delivers value, and look at the KPIs first and the objectives first and design the event around that, which is something I'm really happy about, and I hope will be happening more in the coming months as the sort of lockdowns that seems to keep going. I think we just need to really figure out ways in which we can help those stakeholders in a time that's really critical to be able to keep innovating and to keep having more startups sort of coming out of those different regions and ecosystems, and not only the big ones that everybody expects because there's already an established support system there, but really facilitate in the regions where that support system might not be as strong, and something like COVID could sort of like really hinder a lot of the innovation that's happening in those places. Yeah, so those are for the things that we've done, and I'm more than happy to, as I said, discuss it a bit more in depth later on, especially on the innovation and the investment side later on. I think it's fair to say that we've done that with a number of different stakeholders already. GTI is one of them, and that's why I'm so happy that we can discuss this with Josefina to sort of see what were their objectives and how we've moved forward in helping them to actually built up the ecosystem and stay relevant within Germany. But we've done that also, as I mentioned, with the Dutch government, with Spain, with Korea, with different governments around the world. And I think it's important to realize that even sort of regardless of the ecosystem in which you're in, there's always activities that you can put in place and that you can build in order to sort of grow the support system that you're offering to the different key stakeholders and to sort of keep building bridges. And I think in the moments where it might seem the hardest or where the conditions are the harshest, now is really the time in which you want to start putting those things in place so that people understand that you're there to support, not just when things are looking up, but also when things are difficult. And that's what people will remember afterwards. So we've been discussing that intensely with people in France as well, and seeing all the measures that have been put in place with organizations like La French Tech. And I think it's really key to see that when things are difficult, this is when you expect those organizations to step up and to really be the pillars that are supporting organizations, which will make it a very strong ecosystem when things are looking good again. Yeah, so I think that's it. That's it for my side. Yeah, here are a few examples of the partners that we've worked with, and we can come back to that later on. But yeah, a number of different activities for different regions, which I'm really happy about.
Great, Sebastian. Thank you so much. And we in our work have been witnessing what you do. We are both working in Seoul as an example. It's been hugely impressive. And obviously, we're so happy to join you in what you did with Couch Conference and other formats in the spring, as you put it, keeping these connections going. Really excited that we got Josefina with us today. I mentioned the top ecosystems, and Berlin in Germany is undoubtedly one of those. And traditionally, it has been one of those. But Germany is a much bigger country with many more hubs and digital hub initiatives and so forth. A lot of things are happening, particularly in these deep tech segments that I was mentioning, really groundbreaking innovation. But I think from an ecosystem perspective, from a funding, access to capital, access to later stage capital in particular, there's some way to go, some room to improve. That's at least what our data is clearly showing. We would love to hear from you in the first person, so to speak, what you've been doing around German trade and investment in order to attract, and your collaboration with Sebastian and TNW. Really excited to hear more about that. Josefina.
Yeah, thank you, Stephan. First of all, I feel like I'm with friends. I really like Startup Genome. We used it when we built our department, Germany Trade and Invest, because it didn't exist in 2017. It was put in place. And second, I have another friend, the Next Web online. So I really feel like it's a nice session. And I saw that Johanna Hebestreit, hi from here, is one of the persons participating at the webinar from Invest in Bavaria, who was at one of our analog events in the old year, 2019, at Vivatech in Paris. So thank you for having me. And I would like to, I just brought 2 slides, not like Sebastian, not so many, just 2. So first of all, to say what is Germany Trade and Invest? It's the federal promotional agency of the German government. So we're 100% daughter of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. What does it mean? So usually what my colleagues do, they help companies from abroad to settle down in Germany, and they help German SMEs to get information around the world for specific places where they would like to build a business. So we do have around 360 employees, and around 50 are abroad, scattered all over. And we're between Bonn and Berlin, and the headquarters are here in Berlin. And usually, as said, most of the work of my colleagues is to help international companies to settle down in Germany. But my small department, we're just 4 people, we're in charge of the so-called trend innovation scouting. What does it mean? So the Ministry of Economic Affairs in 2017, so really 3 years ago, thought they would need an initiative to help the German ecosystem on its way to digital transformation, its startup ecosystem. So they thought the best way to do it could be to create digital hubs. And they kind of opened an application where different cities could apply for it. They, like the ministry said, okay, those are the topics that we think are the trend topics of the future, like for example, IoT or cybersecurity. And then the cities were able to apply for it. And those that you can see here on the German map are the ones that basically won the pitch in 2017. And then what did it actually mean to win the pitch? So what they won was to become a digital hub of the government, which is a nice brand to have in order to promote yourself when you go abroad. And they got basically my team to support them on the international networking part, and they got another team which is based out of Berlin from the Rocket Internet company, which is the communication agency of Rocket Internet. It's called RCKT. And they're in charge of the national promotional activities of the digital hubs. And as you can see, so for the government, for the Ministry of Economic Affairs, it was really important to have topics, and it's a lot of them, from logistics to IoT, to fintech, to artificial intelligence, and to not only have Berlin, because everybody abroad knew or knows Berlin for its startup ecosystem, and maybe also Munich or Hamburg, but they also wanted to help cities that were less known to be, able to tell a story about what is their expertise and what do they have to offer. And so those hubs are made of startups and SMEs, corporates, as well as academia. And actually, when Adam showed, or I don't know if it was Adam or Stephen, but showed about Startup Genome and their partners, you would see Tech Quartier in Frankfurt, which is one of our digital hubs. But they're all acting autonomously. That means we don't, or the ministry doesn't finance those hubs, but they support them with those two mentioned teams. So, for example, in Frankfurt, you have Sebastian who's running the Tech Quartier. And our job is, as said, to promote those beautiful hubs abroad and get for them international startups, as well as international investors. And also, but like if you rank the target group, the first two are the most relevant, but also businesses, which can range from SMEs to corporates. But our main task is really, my colleagues, as I said, help international companies to come to Germany. We help international startups and international investors to come to the digital hubs in Germany. So it's a little bit different than what is the main task usually of the Germany Trade and Invest. And the name might be a little bit misleading, by the way. Germany Trade and Invest doesn't mean that Germany Trade and invest in companies. It means when Germany Trade and Invest talks about investors, they actually mean companies that simply settle down with a new office in Germany. But in our case, we really mean venture capitalists. So this is basically the difference of my team and the rest of the teams at Germany Trade and Invest. But if you could, Adam, switch to the next slide. Yeah, super, thank you. So yeah, like all of us, it was a tough year because usually, and Johanna, as mentioned, was at the very first picture in Paris at the VivaTech VC reception that we did, which was awesome with the ambassador, and it was really nice events that we were able to run. But then, how do you change and adapt to different circumstances? So you see, like this slide is relatively easy explained, but nevertheless might be interesting to you because it was a challenge to find out how can we transfer the way how we make contacts to VCs. So what we did was the VivaTech reception in Paris was moved to the work that we did with Sebastian, or we'll do this week on Thursday, by the way, the Startup Games, an online pitch event with international investors. So it was our shift, like, okay, how do we get to international investors if we cannot invite them to proper analog VC reception? We can still find a way to have them with us and to present them our startups. And what you see there is the golden gnome from the Next Web, which is our Oscar, and the winning startup gets at the very end. So this was for the VC receptions and how we used to do them. And then we also, like everybody else, I guess, had stands at international tech fairs. The picture is also from Paris at VivaTech. But we thought, okay, so the booth that we used to have at international tech fairs, they were for attracting startups, not that much for venture capitalists, but also to attract other ecosystem leaders. And we wouldn't have this opportunity anymore. So what we thought in that case, which is not 100% one-to-one shift, but we thought of a roundtable. So what you can see there is like pictures from ecosystem leaders of Europe, because we did a European or a roundtable of European startup initiatives. So of course we thought, how can we still reach out to those ecosystem leaders and talk about what is challenging to all of us, what is relevant to all of us. And so end of June, we created this roundtable, which was very nice. And I think it also helps to, in times of pandemic craziness like we have right now, as Sebastian said, to still have this bonding. And on the 5th of November, also with the Next Web, by the way, therefore it also says Health Roundtable, we will have an event supported by the Next Web and together with the Swedish government, a 2-hour live session. It's also for the same reason that we still want to work and collaborate with ecosystems in those times like we have today, and especially for the topic of digital health is really relevant. And the very last pictures you would see is we also would have, of course, a stage presence. This one is from the NOAA conference in 2019. And then we thought, okay, so we can't have any stage presences right now because there are just no exhibitions or trade fairs offered. But we still offer stage presence for our representatives of the digital hubs by buying stage presence at conferences like this one that you're seeing is the Collision Conference, which is also run from Paddy Cosgrave, who invented, so to say, the Web Summit. So we try to give them the same exhibition time or state presence that they would have had at a NOAA conference or at the Web Summit. Of course, it's, as said, it's not 100% the same, but we're trying to make up for what has happened. And so the person that you see on the picture is Anne Braun from the Digital Health Hub in Nürnberg-Erlangen, and she's basically talking, and that's why you see the eHub at the very end as a logo. She's talking about her health hub and trying to, on her way, to attract startups and other multipliers that are relevant to her hub. So basically, this is what we're trying to do since March. And all of this wouldn't have been possible without the Next Web. So I just want to say thank you, because it makes a lot of fun to work with someone who's doing really very professional work and trying to help us in this shifting of analog conferences to digital ones. So this would be from my side what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much, Josefina. Really great to understand the wonderful work you're doing and how this shift has happened over such a compressed time frame. I mean, we all have adapted within 2 months, 3 months. I remember our first online conference where we shifted from doing something at the Next Web in Amsterdam, and all of a sudden had to undergo the same processes you just outlined, Josefina. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about the startup games and the way you use them in order to make this critical match between investors, early, mid, later stage, and the startups that are part of it. So if you could tell us a little bit more around that, Josefina, I believe, Sebastian, you've been supporting it. So really love to hear a little bit more insights, how that went, what's different about it, what's unique, what could people take away as learning if they would like to shine a spotlight on their ecosystem as you've done it for the Germans, for the German hubs, and really use it.
So actually the idea was invented, so to say, when talking to our digital hubs, and they were, Stephan, as you were just outlining, they were telling us it's so hard to get access to venture capital, and we don't know how to reach out to investors right now because, like, they're not interested. We just don't find a way. So we thought, okay, so what can we do to enhance and facilitate the contact to investors like we used to? And then we thought, okay, so we used to have, besides what we just presented, or I just presented on the slide, we used to have a pitch night run by the RCQT agency, like an analog pitch night where you would have pitches of startups on the stage, and then there was a jury of investors also on the stage, and in the end, they would decide for one startup. And so we thought, okay, so why shouldn't it be possible to get this as an online event? But what was troubling us that we thought, okay, people are a bit tired of digital events, or maybe not even interested, or what is out there? And we started to do some research. And what we saw is that there were a lot of really not well done events, super boring, people doing pitches of 15 minutes, nobody really cared. And we thought, okay, so if we try to shift an event that usually would be like around 300, 400 people with a stage, with, nice drinks in the end, to an online event, we would need to do it a little bit as a show, so that people find it entertaining and you can get their eyeballs for 2 hours, which is quite a long time to be participating at a digital event. And also we thought, okay, we need to have really good investors because this helps also to get people interested. And we scout our startups out of the digital ecosystem network that we have. So we help our digital hubs by letting them know that they can nominate their startups, and the Next Web, together with the ministry, helps us with the selection process. And this shortlist of startups gets then presented to investors, 5 of them. And actually, without Seb, and I think without the Next Web, it wouldn't have been possible to make a show out of it. But people really liked it because we tried to do it like a show. And there was like a little bit of music in terms of buffer videos in between. And, you know, you need to make something entertaining out of it so that people stay. And we received super good positive, and I just want to hand over to Seb in a second. But just saying, we received from all sides super positive feedback. Was it from the investors in the jury as well as the startups? They said that they would get a lot of, or that they got a lot of attraction on their sites after the events, as well as the people participating, because a lot of people participating had seen events beforehand that were not so nice. And I think it makes a very big difference if you invest proper budget and make a professional event rather than just getting people on, I don't know, a regular meeting and have them, less prepared, just talk about, their business models. And yeah, so it was trying to give back to the community and trying to help our digital hubs to get access to investors.
That's great, and thank you, Josefina. And you mentioned it a lot of times. Not one of the usual web meetings where we try to do a bit of pitching and hope for the best. This seems incredibly well designed and prepared. Seb, what's the magic sauce that you're putting into it? Really curious. I want to learn.
Yes, thank you so much for Josefina for that. I think what I found exciting with that particular event and that our team really took as a challenge is what you were mentioning, is seeing what are the sort of underlying goals and objectives, both from GTI as well as for the investors and for the startups. And looking at what was out there, I think we realized that at this point, if you're organizing another pitch event online on Zoom or other tools that you want to use, you're not only competing with what used to happen offline in terms of like pitch meetings or pitch events, which have now multiplied, and the barrier to entry for people to be able to set it up with the online tools that are available is very low. But it means that there's also this huge range in terms of quality and in terms of the attention that you can get from attendees. So if we wanted to sort of stand out, we needed to really rethink the way that we were going to set it up and design it in a way that would be actually engaging and that would sort of lift the bar as well. So we sort of, as mentioned, learned a bit from the online events that we had organized back in May and June with the Next Web and our online couch conferences, and decided to set up an entire studio in our office and sort of converted our office space in the Netherlands into an office production where Josefina flew in with all of the COVID sort of like guidance in terms of distancing and mask involved at the time, maybe a little bit less difficult than it is today. But still, we sort of decided to do it with a production crew. And sort of do it as if we were anchor or host of an actual TV production, where we had like 3 different camera angles, where we had the jury briefed with a tech check beforehand, same with the startups, who knew exactly when they had to come in, how they needed to come in, what kind of headsets they needed to have set up, and they were prepared to deliver their pitch sort of on the dot, which is something that we don't always see in the pitch competitions out there, where really preparation is key. Everything online sort of requires twice as much attention to detail so that you avoid any kind of issues that can come out of that, and really focusing on what are the objectives of all parties, right? I feel the sort of Zoom fatigue, as people would call it at the time, was really creeping in. And then we realized that you needed to make a fast-paced, engaging show with interaction between the host, between the jury, between the startups, being able to sort of engage not just in the pitch, but actually having a live Q&A where not all of this is recorded, which has also happened at a lot of events out there. And for us to think, how can we basically use those 2 hours and make sure that we don't have a lot of people coming in and dropping off after 10 or 15 minutes, but we can do it in a way that keeps engaging people, and we'll want them to actually ask questions at the end and stick around for a Q&A, because we're not only competing at that stage with, as mentioned, online events, but we're also competing with Netflix, with your favorite book, with time spent with your kids. So I think it's important to realize that at that stage, especially when it's sort of end of the day in a period where everybody works from home, anything that isn't your work day is basically taking on from your personal time. So people needed to make the commitment to sort of give us those 2 hours of their time for something that would add value, and not simply join in because it's happening like you would have had in the past, because maybe there's drinks afterwards and a nice opportunity to connect. We sort of needed to make up for the format with sort of like a new design in order to really keep people's attention. So I think a lot of careful planning and attention to the interaction aspect has been key to making that one a success. And definitely great to be able to work with Jitai, who's been quite flexible and working, I guess, at a much faster pace than they're normally used to be able to sort of make that happen, which I think was also key to being able to build an event like this, where if it were online, we would have had to spend months in planning and back and forth and approval. And the fact that this had to happen relatively quickly and that we couldn't sit in the same room to make a lot of those decisions, they just needed to be accelerated.
That's great. Josefina and Seb, I've personally been running quite a number of investor days in my life, some better than others, some not as convincing as I would have hoped. And to me, it always came back to actually the preparation. So not only the quality of the event as such, but making sure that in the build-up, there's the right pitch, there's the right selection, there's the right flow of information to investors for them to come. I mean, I typically in the old days asked them to fly into a place. So a huge time commitment from an international VC's perspective. Did you do anything in particular here to give these investors, seed stage, later stage, the VCs, a few nuggets to really rope them in to spend these 2 times, these 2 hours, sorry?
Yeah, I think we were lucky that we could approach some of the investors that we knew from analog events. So Stephan Nundy from Lakestar is, first of all, he's on the advisory board of the Hub Initiative, and he's a true fan. So he used to, he used to attend our VC receptions and speak at some of those. And so I said, okay, Stephan, we have a problem. We still need our startups to get through to you and to other investors. And he was the very first one that I approached. And I think if you have someone like Lakestar say, yes, I'm in. And after that, even saying, okay, so it's a cool format, I would be joining again. I think it's good because you need those first movers that they say, okay, I'm in for the 2-hour event and I spent my time, because of course they need to do the preparation calls with us beforehand, and we go through the show. And so they invest some time in checking out also the profiles of the startups. And he actually participated sitting in Provence in France on his, during his vacation to be part of it. And I think this is very nice because it shows that there is some kind of community feeling even in those hard times. And he knew that it was important for us because we had promised, and as Sebastian was saying, we were in turbo speed for public sector organizations to create such a format. So after he had said he would be supporting, I knew I could count on him to be there, and that's what he did. And I think you need, it's something that you can that you build with the community somehow, because if he wouldn't have said yes, and then others wouldn't have said yes, we're in, then of course those things cannot work out. And at the same time, they know, and they're also in the same situation, that it's hard to get to meet startups. So it was, I would say, a win-win situation, but it was nothing clear from the beginning.
Okay, thank you, Josefina. So using the community, the peer network, having somebody to step up. Yeah, I mean, what it always is when you create great events, right? You need this core group of 2 or 3 really people with brand clout to help draw the others. Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you would have said, "Oh, wait, it's super boring, 2 hours digital event, I'm not in," it would have been maybe different. I mean, we would have tried to convince other investors, but it's super nice if someone says, "Yes, I'm in, I'm supporting," and it's someone from Lakestar, and he says, "I'm supporting," and he says it on the show, and gives this good vibes. I think it helps a lot.
Thank you. And Seb, any additional comments, remarks for our webinar audience? If you want to if you want to organize a great investor day, a great pitch competition that really hits the objectives.
Yeah, there's one aspect I think that's quite important, and that often plays in the background, so we don't sort of discuss it too much. It is related to sort of preparation, but more understanding the audience. And I think that in the selection of the companies that were joining the event that we've organized with GTI in this case, and the D Hubs, was really the collaboration between the different responsible individuals from the D Hub to send us recommendation as to which companies they think would be a good fit for that event, and then us contacting them, and then having a panel of jury actually select a number of criterias and then rank all of the startups one by one, and then being able to actually pick the ones that came on top based on those criterias that were decided between GTI and TNW as being the ones that they wanted to portray. So there's sort of this process of deciding what are your objectives, what criteria correlate with those objectives, and then how are we going to grade the companies, figuring out which ones are the best companies across an entire country that we can select that are representing sort of the high quality potentials that we have in those ecosystems, and then have a fair and objective ranking system to be able to actually select which companies will end up participating. So it's not like we sort of sent a call out with just a type form and say, hey, if you want to pitch, you can just sign up here. There's sort of a lot more thought that's put into that process so that the 10 companies that end up presenting on the day really sort of are ready for it, and they're there for a reason. And I think that's what probably the investors that joined sort of appreciated as well, is we could send them up front. These are the companies that you're going to see if you want to sort of look at their base metrics or prepare questions up front. And make it sort of more interesting for the audience as well, because there's been this preparation element that's been involved.
So basically what you do in preparation of a great offline conference, physical conference where we meet, basically the same. What really strikes me here as different is, Josefina, you brought the entirety of the country, not only one location, not only Berlin or Nuremberg or Düsseldorf to the table, or Cologne, but you were able to draw upon a selection from the entire country with as many very nuanced different sectors and strengths. So that's hugely impressive. Possibly leads to another question from Alexandra Belikova that's just come in. It's asking, were you able to address investors from outside of the German environment, the Dutch environment? Was it truly international in that regard, or were you more focused on the ones that are already part of your community in both geographies?
So for the jury, it was a mix of not only German and Dutch, but it's true, it was only European. It was not international in the sense of Asian or US American, for example. But the jury itself was a mix of 5 different countries. For the next session on this Thursday, we will have an investor from San Francisco, SV Ventures. But I wouldn't be able to say, maybe Seb, you can add if you know better than I do. I wouldn't be able to say if the European, or because it says focusing more on attracting local investors, international investors. I think for the startups, I wouldn't say it didn't matter, but it was really important to get exposed to investors anyway, be it European or be it international. And for us, it was easier also because of the timing. For the first session, we just said, okay, we do European ones. But then for the second session, we really thought, as Alexandra is asking, it also makes sense to open up internationally. And maybe this could be, I'm not sure, a win, so to say, of the pandemic, to not have all of this traveling and being able to invite American investors to join such an event. And geographical distance doesn't matter anymore. We wouldn't be able, because the startups didn't share with us yet, we wouldn't be able to say if the investors from the first round did finally invest. But we're chasing the startups to give us information about this. But we will also find out now for the second session with the American investor if there is a difference. So it's something that we don't have a final answer yet. But I would just say that for us, it's relevant to expose our startups to European or international investors.
Yeah, maybe I would add to that even though the majority of the companies and the investors in this case that joined were probably from the Netherlands and Germany, in terms of our focus, as Josefina mentioned, it was focused on at least the whole of Europe, if not more globally, and there were investors that joined in from multiple countries, which I think was great and probably wouldn't have been as easy to do with an analog event. So I guess a nice sort of effect from turning digital. That even though we weren't per se targeting German and Dutch ones, we've also had a lot of international investors tuning in.
It's great to hear, and I love to hear that even in difficult times, this becomes almost a leveler. It brings in my mind, on one of the TNW conferences, I had the opportunity to interview the CEO of the Latin American Development Bank, and she told me that in the past, you only had a chance to pitch if you were based in Sao Paulo. You could physically meet your investors. And all of a sudden, in this new world, it doesn't matter anymore. You can set in the how she put it, in the Amazon Delta, and you got the same chances. Not sure it's entirely true, but it's, in a sense, this level of access to the same level of investment, the same quality of investment. That's a very upbeat message, I think, if you want to see the upside of what's happening right now. That's for sure. So thank you very much for giving us that insight. We do have one other question which leads us slightly away or broadens up a little bit the discussion from investors only, and that is, how important is it for ecosystem builders, people who organize, who manage startup ecosystems, support the startup ecosystems, to build a brand, build a proposition that investors will find attractive? So in a sense, broader than just an investor day, but alluding to what's the proposition of a place. Why do I come to Berlin? Why should I go to Nuremberg? Why should I go to Munich? Why should I go to Dortmund? And to tell these stories. Do you have any insights there, or do you do any work in terms of profiling the different hubs and the ecosystems? I think this goes to Josefina first.
Mm-hmm. So actually, I was thinking that we're lucky enough that GTI gets approached by investors without sometimes doing any effort, to be honest, because they're super happy when they find out that we're a public organization and we don't charge anything for presenting them nice startups and filling up their pipeline. So it's a good business in terms of, not charging at all, and they, ask us questions in terms of, okay, so I'm focused on digital health. Would you have startups in this area, and where do I find them? And then we point out, okay, so we do have 2 digital hubs for digital health, for example, in Nuremberg, Erlangen, and of course we would promote whole Germany, but in our case, as we have the hubs, we first promote those, and they have topics. So it's a relatively good story for investors in terms of matchmaking, because they just tell us what portfolio they have and in which areas they mainly invest, plus in which stages, and then we get back to our digital hub representatives. Sometimes it's not just digital health, but digital health and mobility and logistics and so on, and we would get in touch with our main contact persons and let them know, okay, so look, this Japanese investor is looking for your topic first of all, and he's trying to find startups in this specific or in this stage, and then they do the work and get in touch afterwards with the VCs. And it's I think the best thing for telling is really that we're non-for-profit or public, because this is something that most of the investors that get in touch with us, be it from Australia, Japan, or I don't know, whatever, are really happy to understand. And I think the problem used to be that investors wouldn't know that much about the fact that there are public organizations that have anything to do with startups and do the matchmaking. But the good thing about our department is that it is our focus and that we do it for free. So so there is no guideline with regards to the question in terms of what else to do rather than events. In our case, the investors approach us, and with the events that we're doing, we have a lot to do. But there is one more aspect which I would like to add. It's a digital communication campaign. So we're doing a campaign starting now in November in different countries, for example, in Israel, in France, in the Netherlands, where we pitch our digital hubs and their startups. So that would not be an event, but this is a targeted campaigning in social media, LinkedIn, Insta, and so on. But our main focus, I must admit, is actually events, be it analog or offline.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josefina. Seb, any perspective from you? Ecosystem branding, clear propositions. Does that make a difference when we look at investors? Doesn't make a difference when you think about talent coming in and deciding upon where to run the next venture.
Absolutely. I think it does make a difference. I think it's important for those organizations to state clearly what they stand for and what they're trying to achieve. I think when we're talking about sort of the awareness and the visibility, though, it is not about running big marketing campaigns that are putting the governmental agency forward or the ecosystem representatives forward, but it is really more discussing what are the opportunities that they're providing for the different key stakeholders within that ecosystem. So I think TechLeap is a great example of this, which is like the local governmental agency in the Netherlands that's sort of fostering technology and innovation, or Startup Amsterdam, which is also trying to sort of push forward everything that happens around the tech ecosystem in the city. To really try to sort of push forward the initiatives that they're working with, so that it benefits all of the members that they're actually targeting, which is their main audience. So the campaigns, whether it's social or marketing, or whether it's sort of like activities and events, is not focused on themselves. It's focused on their goals and the objectives of their key stakeholders that they're trying to serve, and really sort of like, shifting the attention away from them, though making themselves visible and present, but always with sort of this objective of we're a vehicle to be able to help those people grow and sort of develop. So I think that's important. And then being intentional about what are the key activities we're pushing forward, what are those core objectives, and how do we make sure that they're realized by being present online, by doing social marketing campaigns, etc., in a smart and targeted way, so that it sort of always comes back to those underlying goals.
A very smart approach, a neutral perspective, a non-commercial perspective that's authentic. That absolutely makes sense. I think the only thing I have to add from a startup genome perspective is, particularly in smaller ecosystems, we often argue for a very strong specialization. Make it something that really stands out. Don't invent the next story about fintech cluster number 55 on the planet, but rather go for these things that are really authentic, where you got the talent pools, where you maybe got a local brand traditionally. That makes sense and really resonates from a communications perspective, and can be a strong brand proposition for particularly a smaller hub that's less related to the large ones, of course. Yeah, I think this helps us a lot. Ivo Cruz also asked us, what are the main drivers, characteristics local startup ecosystems should have to promote and attract international VC scouting attention? I think we covered these quite a lot. Any last thoughts in that respect?
Maybe I can add that with that one. I think it's focused to what you were just finishing with now. I think the specialization part is really important, and being able to work with the key ecosystem players around specific topics is generally helpful for VCs, because they know why they will go to a specific place or interact with events and key ecosystem players in certain cities, because they're really focused on this. And then the whole support ecosystem goes around this. If I had to pick sort of an example, I would think that Wageningen, for example, in the east of the Netherlands, has always been focused on food tech. A lot of the research and knowledge institutes over there are focused around that, a lot of the investments and some of the corporate companies as well. And there's this whole ecosystem that's being built around this. And if you're coming to the Netherlands, then that's most likely the place you'll head to if food tech is the things that you're interested in, instead of Amsterdam, even though there's probably more investors in Amsterdam than there are in the East, but it is not focused on the same things. So if you're really sort of looking for VC scouts, then I would think, what is your edge? What is your sort of like specialization, as you've actually mentioned?
Yeah, and Josefina, I mean, we see it in Germany quite a bit. So you mentioned TechQuartier in Frankfurt is a client of ours, but we are also admiring the work they've done. Clearly focused on fintech. That's what Frankfurt stands for. I'm so impressed, being German myself, but I left the country a long time ago, to see what's happening in logistics in Dortmund. Yeah, what a shame, a Bonner leaving the country. But seeing logistics in Dortmund, yeah, it would never have crossed my mind from where I'm sitting here. But to hear what's happening and to seeing it now first place in our work with the NRW government is hugely impressive. It's specialization that really resonates.
If I can add one thing as a Berliner, I'm super happy that the Berlin startup ecosystem created so many jobs in the last years. And I think when asking for main drivers, what was surely helpful is when you have success stories like Zalando or N26, or you have a company builder like Rocket Internet, and people start knowing about the startup ecosystem because of strong names. I don't say this is everything, but it helps. You know, if people say, okay, Rocket Internet, yeah, sure, or Zalando, oh, yeah, sure, and those, you know, those success stories were, I think, for the Berlin ecosystem very, very helpful, so that also Microsoft and Google and so on and so forth created accelerator programs here in the city, and then also VCs would, you know, create satellite offices here, and you know, it helps to prosper a startup ecosystem. But it's not built within 1 year, of course. I mean, I would say it was in the last 10 years after my studies that Berlin developed into such a strong ecosystem. But as I didn't leave my country, I actually came back. But for me, it was beautiful to see, as you were just saying, how it was, you know, from the time when I left, where there were no well-paid jobs in Berlin, to coming back and you have well-paid jobs and you have a startup ecosystem, and this attracts young people and young talents. And it's a whole new story. So I'm a big believer of the startup ecosystems in general, because I've seen it myself in real life, how it changes your city.
Undoubtedly. Josefina, Seb, I'm looking a little bit at the watch. This was a hugely inspiring discussion. If I may summarize the big points that I've taken away. We need to replace the physical events, the meeting places, the relationships between startups and their investors. We need to make them visible. I think with the online format, it was well executed, and there was a lot of talk today about well executed, really incredibly well done. Also done in an entertaining way, things that really attract people and keep their attention. That seemed really important. Great preparation, but to replace these physical events with something that's online, but really extremely well done, extremely well prepared, is a must-do for us as people who seek to help our entrepreneurial communities, because otherwise we will not have these connections, or they will be very lopsided, where only a few get the spotlight. Maybe the already renowned ones, and the others don't. If I see another positive, it's certainly that you, Josefina, were able to bring all the other hubs in a massive country into that flow of events and activity, as opposed to just having the spotlight on the big city only, which I think will undoubtedly help the other hubs and the other specializations that we see in the country. And I think that's a learning and a takeaway for many other places in the world as well, where possibly from our perspective, too much attention is always on the capital city, and the rest kind of is suffering a little bit from not being part of it, not garnering the attention and the spotlight so much. I think that is that's maybe the magic sauce. Thank you so much to TNW as well. We've been working with you very closely. I can firsthand say how professional the preparation and then the execution of these activities in branding and communications and events really has been. So thank you very much for that. Thank you both for joining us today. And I would love to hand over to Adam for a minute or two for me.
Fantastic, yeah. Thank you very much, Josefina, Stephan, and Sebastian, today on the topic of attracting VC investment to your city or region. I'm just finishing off with our final slide, which we would love to hear from you in relation to this topic or any future topics. There is my contact details here from the Startup Genome side, and Sebastian's contact details from the next website. And we would like to note again that everyone will receive the recording and the slides from this webinar. So you'll have all the links involved and all the details. And we hope that you can join our future webinars, the next being X-ray vision of your startup ecosystem, tracking and globally benchmarking your innovation economy. So thanks very much, Josefina, Sebastian, and Stephan, and we hope to see everyone in the audience soon. So have a great day, and thank you.
Again, a big thank you for attending today to all our audience, to Josefina, to Seb. Thank you so much. Have a great start into the week.
And stay
Thanks
healthy.
for having us.
Guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.